the business analyst. Welcome to the research desk.
Imagine knowing that a major continental war has, just ended.
The pattern recognizer.
Right. And knowing that you are literally the only person in a 500-mile radius with that information.
Exactly. In the early 19th century, an information vacuum of that scale was not a market glitch. It was the fundamental architecture of the global financial system. Today, we are examining an institution that built a 228-year financial dynasty, a legacy that is, well, it's still influencing global markets right now.
Which is crazy when you realize how it started.
Right. This entire empire was originally constructed on a temporary speed advantage. We are looking at a family that conquered European finance using carrier pigeons, private relay riders, and charter boats in the English Channel. And those physical methods of transmitting information, they vanished over a century ago. They were rendered completely obsolete by the telegraph. And yet, the empire built on those pigeons remains intact today.
The business analyst.
Yes.
The pattern recognizer. So you look at this history and you champion the sheer mechanical brilliance of their financial flywheel. You focus heavily on the logistics of their network and the mechanics of the cross-border arbitrage.
Well, I focus on it because it is unparalleled in business history. They constructed a multinational logistics network that allowed them to execute trades at a scale that was previously thought to be, frankly, impossible. They looked at the highly fragmented, highly volatile geography of 1800s Europe and saw it not as a barrier, but as a mathematical equation.
An equation they solved.
Right. An equation they solved through pure operational superiority, the pattern recognizer. I view that temporary speed advantage through a very different lens, though. I think we need to stress test the narrative of the physical network. Because when you look closely at the underlying dynamics of this story, you find the exact same pattern that defines modern technology monopolies.
The business analyst?
Like who?
The pattern recognizer. Companies like Nvidia, Google, Bloomberg. The speed of the horses and the pigeons was not the actual edge. The speed was merely the acquisition cost for the true permanent asset. They used a temporary asymmetry in information to build permanent trust.
Okay, but to fully grasp the magnitude of that structural asymmetry, we have to establish the staggering reality of the early 19th century information desert. Europe in the 1800s was not just slow by our standards, it was fundamentally disconnected, the pattern recognizer.
Totally isolated.
The business analysts. Markets operated as entirely isolated islands. The fastest a message could travel from London to Vienna was, 8 to 12 days by horse courier?
The pattern recognizer. Yeah, around there. And there was no standardized postal system as we understand it today. A merchant attempting to send a letter across the continent had to navigate this incredibly complex patchwork of sovereign borders.
Which was a nightmare.
A total nightmare. You were relying on government mail channels, such as the Thurn Taxis postal monopoly in Central Europe. Those channels were highly interceptable.
Right. Anyone could just open the wax seal.
Exactly.
They were notoriously unreliable, and they were subject to the political whims of local officials who routinely, as a matter of state policy, opened and read the mail of foreign financiers.
The business analyst. So that isolation created a pure mathematical arbitrage opportunity of unbelievable scale. Let us break down the exact mechanics of how cross-border arbitrage functioned in this specific environment.
The pattern recognizer.
Walk me through it.
Okay, assume you are looking at a British government bond, specifically a consul, which is a perpetual bond paying a fixed interest rate. That exact same British bond could trade at wildly different prices in Paris, London, and Frankfurt simultaneously.
Right. So if the bond is trading at a price of 90 in London, it might be trading at 95 in Paris on the exact same afternoon?
Yes. And the price disparity existed simply because the news of a pivotal treaty or military victory or, the death of a monarch had not yet physically arrived in the other cities.
The pattern recognizer.
The news was still literally on the road.
The business analyst.
Exactly. London might know that the British government is planning to issue a massive new tranche of debt to fund the military campaign. That new supply of debt will naturally drive the price of existing bonds down.
The pattern recognizer.
But Paris does not know that yet. Paris is trading on information that is essentially 2 weeks old.
The business analyst.
Yes.
The pattern recognizer.
The investors in Paris are pricing the British bond based on a geopolitical reality that literally no longer exists.
The business analyst.
So the mechanical execution of the arbitrage is straightforward in theory, but incredibly difficult in practice.
You buy the bond in London at 90. You immediately dispatch a courier across the English Channel, riding through hostile or, politically unstable territory to physically carry that paper to Paris. The pattern recognizer. And you have to beat the official mail, the business analyst. Right. You sell it in the Paris market at 95 before the news of the new debt issuance arrives through the slower traditional government mail channels. You lock in a massive risk-free profit. It's astonishing. The pattern recognizer. It is, but I question whether we can accurately call that an inefficiency. What do you mean? The pattern recognizer. Well, was it a market inefficiency or simply the absolute physical speed limit of the era? We look back from a modern era of fiber optics and assume that differing prices across geographies represent a failure of the market. But in a world governed by the physics of horses, dirt roads, and sailing ships, the market was actually pricing in the absolute limit of available data. The business analyst. I see what you're saying, but it is a structural inefficiency relative to the party who possesses the superior logistics network. If I can move the data in 2 days and the market naturally moves the data in 7 days, I have engineered a 5-day window of pure inefficiency for my own exploitation. The pattern recognizer. Fair enough. Consider the modern parallel of high-frequency trading, right? Today, quantitative trading firms spend hundreds of millions of dollars to co-locate their servers mere feet from the matching engines of the New York Stock Exchange or the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. Right, they pay a premium for physical proximity. Exactly. They are laying straight-line fiber optic cables through mountains just to shave microseconds off their latency. The business analyst, and they are fighting over the exact same structural gap. The difference is just the unit of measurement. Today, the latency is measured in fractions of a millisecond. In the early 1800s, the latency was measured in weeks. The pattern recognizer. But we have to consider the profound psychological reality of trading in that kind of complete vacuum. Imagine the risk profile of a market where a major continental war could be effectively over for 2 weeks before the primary financial hub even knows peace has been declared. The business analyst. It's terrifying. You are committing massive amounts of capital based on a ghost of the past. When you buy that bond in Paris, you are hoping the underlying reality of the world has not shifted beneath your feet while the courier is on the road.
The structural gap between truth and market pricing was absolute.
The business analyst.
And that psychological reality is precisely why the architectural insight of Mayer Amschel Rothschild is so profound. The origin story of this empire begins in the Judengasse, which was the Jewish ghetto of Frankfurt.
The pattern recognizer.
Right.
The business analyst.
Mayer Amschel started as a relatively modest coin dealer. He eventually secured the patronage of Crown Prince Wilhelm of Hesse-Kassel, managing the prince's immense wealth. But his true genius was not merely in picking financial assets. His genius was operational architecture.
Because he realized that structural architecture permanently beats individual brilliance.
Exactly. An individual trader can get lucky on a geopolitical guess. An individual trader can charter a fast boat on a given Tuesday, but a system designed to systematically collapse latency across an entire continent, that is an enduring structural advantage.
The pattern recognizer. So how did he build it?
The business analyst. Well, between 1798 and 1820, Mayer Amschel deployed his 5 sons to the 5 most critical financial and political nodes in Europe. Nathan was sent to London, which was the deepest, most liquid capital market in the world. James went to Paris, the political center of continental Europe. Solomon established himself in Vienna, the seat to the Habsburg Empire. Karl positioned himself in Naples, which was the gateway to Mediterranean trade and political influence in the Italian states. And Amschel remained in Frankfurt to manage the original core operation.
The pattern recognizer. Now, each of these 5 branches was legally independent, right?
Yes, legally independent.
The pattern recognizer. They operated as distinct partnerships.
Yet, operationally, they functioned as a single continent-spanning organism.
The business analyst. They pulled their immense capital. They shared daily, highly granular market intelligence. They built a private logistics network using full-time,
heavily compensated agents whose sole professional directive was to move information across sovereign borders faster than the governments themselves could manage.
The pattern recognizer. That's the key part, faster than the governments.
They did not use the main roads. They charted private routes specifically designed to avoid border inspections and state toll booths. They maintained private charter boats permanently on standby on the coast of the English Channel, just waiting for a rider to arrive at any hour of the day or night.
Okay, I completely concede the architectural brilliance of the 5-node distribution. Deploying trusted family members to the 5 key financial hubs was a masterstroke of organizational design. But, and this is a big but, I push back strongly on the premise that the physical speed of the horses and the boats was the primary innovation here.
The business analyst. How can you push back on that? The physical speed was the entire mechanism that unlocked the cross-border arbitrage. Without the speed, the prices equalize before you can execute the trade.
The pattern recognizer, because you can build the fastest physical network in the world, but if your competitors or hostile governments can read your data in transit, your speed is completely worthless.
Ah,
Right? The true innovation of the Rothschild network was the absolute security of the data payload. We have over 20,000 surviving letters exchanged between the 5 brothers during this period. And these letters are written almost entirely in Judendeutsch, the business analyst. For those unfamiliar, Judendeutsch is a specific dialect where German words are rendered phonetically using Hebrew characters.
the pattern recognizer.
Yes, it served as the 19th century equivalent of end-to-end encryption.
That's a great way to frame it.
The pattern recognizer,
Think about it. Even if a rival banker or a highly suspicious French government minister successfully intercepted a Rothschild courier on the road to Paris, the contents of the diplomatic pouch were mathematically and linguistically opaque to them. A standard European censor looking at the paper would not just fail to read the words, they would fail to even identify the language family.
they're just looking at Hebrew letters.
Exactly. They could not parse whether it was a religious text, a personal letter, or a set of highly sensitive financial instructions.
So it insulated the physical vulnerability of the courier.
The pattern recognizer.
Precisely. You do not just need a faster network when you are outrunning sovereign governments. You need a network that is structurally invisible to them. Information advantage always demands 2 pillars. First, you must acquire the data before anyone else. Second, you must ensure absolutely no one else can access your data while you are acting on it.
They deployed what was essentially military-grade cryptography for the purpose of civilian bond arbitrage.
The business analyst,
And that cryptography protected the core mechanism of their business, which, if we really drill down into it, was a self-reinforcing 5-gear compounding machine. When you map the exact mechanics of this business model, the sheer operational scale becomes breathtaking.
the pattern recognizer.
Okay, let's walk through the gears of this flywheel systematically.
Gear 1 is the speed advantage itself, protected by the cryptography you just described. That speed enabled the execution of cross-border arbitrage across the 5 nodes.
The pattern recognizer.
Right, because they could track bond prices simultaneously in London, Paris, and Vienna with much lower latency than the broader market. They could buy undervalued assets in one market and sell them in another before the price differential closed.
The business analyst.
That brings us to Gear 2. This continuous low-risk arbitrage generated massive capital accumulation. By the 1820s, the combined Rothschild fortune across the 5 houses was estimated at roughly £6 million.
Which is a staggering amount of money.
To put the gravity of that number in perspective, the entire annual budget of the British government at that time was roughly £60 million.
Wow.
So a single private family operation held highly liquid capital equivalent to 10% of a global superpower's annual spending.
The business analyst. Exactly. Which turns Gear 3. You translate that massive liquidity into sovereign influence. They stopped merely trading government debt and became the primary underwriters for the governments themselves.
The pattern recognizer.
They became the source.
Yes, in Paris alone, the Rothschilds financed 18 major sovereign loans worth approximately 1.5 billion francs. They were no longer reacting to the issuance of debt. They were the primary mechanism by which nations funded their operations.
Which leads perfectly into Gear 4. Gear 4 is the inevitable result of underwriting sovereign debt. It provides you with unparalleled insight information.
Because you're seeing the books.
You're writing the books.
When you are the entity restructuring the debt of the Habsburg Empire or funding the British military, you are granted intimate access to a nation's fiscal health, their tax revenue projections, and their immediate military intentions. You know they are preparing for war before the generals have even finalized the marching orders, because the generals cannot march without the credit line you just approved.
The business analyst.
And Gear 5 completes the loop. That deeply classified inside information feeds directly back into superior cross-border arbitrage. You are trading on geopolitical events that you are actively financing.
The pattern recognizer.
It's a perfect, closed system.
It is. The ultimate demonstration of this flywheel in action is Nathan Rothschild moving roughly 600,000 pounds in gold to the Duke of Wellington across an entirely hostile, occupied Europe.
Operation is frequently misunderstood as a simple wire transfer. The logistical reality of moving that capital across enemy lines is staggering.
The business analyst. Let's set the stage. Wellington was fighting the Peninsular War in Spain. He desperately needed physical gold to pay his troops and secure local supplies. He could not pay Spanish merchants in British paper currency.
The pattern recognizer.
They wouldn't take it.
Exactly.
But physically shipping tons of gold from London to Spain by sea was incredibly dangerous due to French naval patrols, and moving it over land was impossible because the French army controlled the intervening territory.
So Nathan Rothschild orchestrated a massive operational diversion.
He quietly bought up massive amounts of French gold.
Right. He then used the Rothschild network to essentially smuggle that gold across the English Channel into France, the very nation Britain was fighting.
The business analyst.
Wait, into France?
Yes. Once the gold was in France, the Paris branch under James Rothschild deposited it in French banks, securing local credit. They then used the 5-node network to issue complex bills of exchange, transferring the value of that credit down through Vienna and Naples, eventually routing the purchasing power into Spain, where Wellington could draw on it locally.
That is brilliant.
They converted currencies at each node, they balanced the books internally across the legally independent partnerships.
Exactly. It was not just a currency exchange. It was an active intelligence operation. Every single transfer, every bill of exchange moving between the brothers revealed military movements and logistical realities on the ground. By mapping where the French banks were tightening credit or where local merchants in Spain were demanding different premiums, the Rothschild network possessed a real-time heat map of the Continental War.
The business analyst.
They possessed this information before the newspapers printed a single word.
The pattern recognizer.
And often before the sovereign governments themselves received dispatches from their own generals.
The business analyst.
We must address the historical myth-making that surrounds these specific intelligence operations, though. I am talking about the persistent Waterloo myth.
The pattern recognizer.
Oh, popular history loves a dramatic cinematic moment.
Right, so the widespread myth suggests that Nathan Rothschild made his entire vast fortune on a single day of trading on the London Stock Exchange.
The story claims he received advance notice via carrier pigeon of Napoleon's final defeat at Waterloo, stood against a pillar at the exchange, feigned panic to crash the market, and then bought up all the British consuls at rock-bottom prices before the official government messenger arrived. The pattern recognizer. It makes for a great movie scene.
The business analyst. It does, but the historical record thoroughly debunks this narrative. It is true that Nathan received the news of Waterloo roughly 48 hours before the British government. His courier network was genuinely that much faster, but he did not use it to execute a massive deceptive pump-and-dump scheme. In fact, he immediately took the intelligence directly to the British government, who initially refused to believe him.
The pattern recognizer. So the fortune was not made on a single lucky trade on a Sunday afternoon?
No.
The wealth generation was an ongoing, deeply systematic bond arbitrage over decades. The Waterloo trade was highly profitable, yes, because he held a massive long position on British debt, betting that Britain would eventually win the war. When the victory was secured, the value of that debt skyrocketed. The pattern recognizer. But the true value of the network was exactly what you described with the Wellington transfers. It was the continuous, daily flow of operational intelligence.
The business analyst.
Exactly. It highlights the difference between an event-driven windfall and a structural market advantage.
The pattern recognizer.
I connect this directly to the playbook of Standard Oil in the late 19th century. John D. Rockefeller understood deeply that information about your counterparties is infinitely more valuable than raw market pricing. Knowing the exact spot price of crude oil in Cleveland is helpful, but knowing the precise fiscal vulnerability, the shipping costs, and the internal inventory levels of your rival refinery, that is transformative. It allows you to dictate the terms of their surrender.
The business analyst. That's a powerful analogy. The Rothschilds effectively operated as a private, decentralized central bank long before modern central banking structures existed. By denominating foreign government bonds in the investor's home currency, they eliminated currency risk for the buyer.
The pattern recognizer. How did that work exactly?
The business analyst? Well, if a British investor wanted to buy Prussian debt, the Rothschilds would issue the bond in pound sterling in London, paying the interest in pounds.
So they absorb the currency fluctuation risk internally.
Yes, and by doing so, they inserted themselves as the absolute, indispensable intermediary between the sovereign states and the global capital markets.
They own the counterparty risk, which means they owned all the counterparty data. The pattern recognizer. They knew exactly who held the debt, what their liquidity profile looked like, and when they would be forced to sell.
The business analyst.
Right.
Now, that level of structural dominance brings us to the most terrifying moment in any business life cycle. We are talking about the arrival of a technological paradigm shift that completely democratizes your core foundational advantage.
The pattern recognizer.
The wall.
The wall. For the Rothschild empire, it came in the form of a copper wire.
The pattern recognizer. The timeline of this technological disruption is brutal when you look at it. In 1843, early commercial telegraph lines began successfully transmitting information between Hamburg and Frankfurt.
Okay.
The pattern recognizer. By the 1850s, major European capital cities were actively wired together.
And in 1866, the transatlantic cable successfully linked London to New York, defeating the ultimate geographic barrier of the ocean.
The business analyst. Consider the devastating business reality this presented to the core Rothschild mechanism. Their entire cross-border arbitrage machine, the foundation of their immense capital accumulation, relied entirely on the fact that information took a week to travel from Paris to London. That delay was the oxygen of their business model.
The pattern recognizer. The telegraph acted as a latency collapsing function. It did not just make communication faster, it effectively evaporated the geography that the Rothschilds had so successfully monetized.
So what actually happened? Think about this for a second. When any average merchant sitting in Paris with a telegraph subscription can pull the live London bond prices in a matter of minutes, the cross-border arbitrage spread immediately drops to absolute zero.
The pattern recognizer. The window closes. The business analyst, the core profit engine, simply ceases to function. The fundamental asymmetry that had generated their wealth evaporated into the copper wires. The pattern recognizer. The existential panic internally must have been profound. I mean, you have spent half a century building the most sophisticated physical logistics network in human history. You maintain fleets of boats and stables of horses, and virtually overnight, a competitor with a telegraph key and a Morse code operator can match your data speed for a fraction of a penny.
The business analyst. The impact was measurable, too. The Naples House, one of the original 5 nodes, eventually closed as the geopolitical and technological landscape shifted. Their unchallenged dominance in certain raw trading markets actively eroded. The physical barrier of geography, which they had conquered at such incredible expense, was suddenly eliminated for everyone.
The pattern recognizer. This poses the ultimate strategic dilemma. If your entire empire is built on being the absolute fastest, what happens on the day you wake up and speed is suddenly a cheap, widely available commodity?
The business analyst? It's a great question.
Because this reveals the universal law of technology. Speed advantages are always, without exception, temporary.
Always. A technological moat based purely on physical execution will always eventually be bridged by better engineering.
From the carrier pigeon to the commercial telegraph, from the telegraph to the telephone, from the telephone to modern microwave towers relaying market data, from microwave towers to modern co-located servers. The clock is perpetually ticking on an information edge.
You cannot build a multi-century dynasty on speed alone, because physics and engineering will eventually allow your competitors to match your velocity. The democratization of speed is the single most predictable force in economic history.
The business analyst, yet they did survive.
The pattern recognizer.
They did.
The business analyst. They survived the total death of their defining speed advantage through a masterful, highly calculated pivot in their core business model. They recognized very early that the arbitrage spread was gone permanently, so they abandoned the short-term, latency-dependent trading that required speed. They took the immense capital they had accumulated and shifted it aggressively into long-duration advisory and underwriting.
They transitioned from a business that required speed to a business that required absolute trust.
Exactly. They began financing enormous, heavily relationship-dependent infrastructure projects. These were projects that defined the Industrial Revolution.
Like what?
Well, James Rothschild provided the critical financing for the Chemin de Fer du Nord, which was one of the most vital and expansive railway lines in France. They provided the heavy capital backing required to construct the Suez Canal, completely reshaping global shipping routes. They funded massive, deeply complex global mining operations spanning from Spain to South America. The pattern recognizer. And these are not trades you execute in milliseconds. These are not assets you flip because you have a 3-day information advantage. These are multi-decade, irreversible commitments of capital that require profound institutional stability and deep political alignment. The business analyst. They converted the liquid wealth generated by their temporary speed edge into the ultimate permanent asset, structural integration into the global economy. The pattern recognizer. This is where the pattern recognition becomes entirely undeniable for me. The carrier pigeon network lasted approximately 40 years before the commercial telegraph effectively neutralized it. 40 years is the exact same lifespan as the initial speed edges of modern technology monopolies.
The business analyst. Explain how that time frame maps to a modern software or hardware monopoly.
The pattern recognizer. Okay, look at Bloomberg. In their early days, they utilized early, vastly superior access to raw financial data and rapid bond pricing to build a terminal. The speed and aggregation of that data was their initial edge, but they used that temporary advantage to build a proprietary communication network and an analytics interface that became an absolute workflow dependency for Wall Street.
Right, the chat function alone.
Exactly. The data speed is now commoditized. Anyone can get real-time stock quotes on their phone. But the Bloomberg terminal remains deeply entrenched because of the permanent workflow dependency they built while they were the fastest.
The business analyst. So the speed captured the user, but the workflow retained them. The pattern recognizer. Look at Google. They utilized the sheer computational speed and relevance of the original PageRank algorithm to capture global user attention. But they did not just rest on having a faster search engine. They converted that massive influx of attention into an insurmountable, highly sticky global advertising network and data ecosystem. The underlying search speed is no longer their unique moat. The ecosystem is.
The business analyst.
And we see the exact same dynamics playing out in hardware right now. The pattern recognizer.
Look at Nvidia. They achieved a massive, multi-year head start in raw GPU processing power. But their true brilliant pivot was using that hardware speed advantage to develop CUDA. Just to ground that concept for a second, CUDA is Nvidia's proprietary software interface that allows developers to write programs specifically for Nvidia graphics processing units.
The pattern recognizer. Exactly. They essentially locked developers into their specific hardware architecture. They used the temporary physical speed edge of their chips to build a highly sticky, deeply entrenched developer ecosystem. Even if a rival chip manufacturer produces a slightly faster processor tomorrow, the entire artificial intelligence industry is already writing their software in CUDA.
The business analyst. The pattern is identical across centuries. You use the temporary speed edge to acquire the permanent asset.
The pattern recognizer. The speed is just the bait. The ecosystem, the workflow dependency, the relationship capital, that is the actual business. The real edge of the Rothschilds was never the physical speed of the horses or the channel-crossing pigeons.
The speed was merely the catalyst required to get them in the room with the sovereign powers.
The business analyst.
Right. The pattern recognizer. The enduring asset was the fact that European governments implicitly trusted them.
After decades of flawless, highly discrete execution, sovereign nations knew the Rothschild network could move massive amounts of capital, absorb staggering levels of counterparty risk, and maintain absolute political discretion.
The business analyst. Trust, unlike market data or bond pricing, cannot be transmitted faster by a copper wire. It has to be built over decades of reliable execution.
The pattern recognizer. The Telegraph could transmit a number instantly, but it could not transmit the certainty that the debt would be fully subscribed or that the military payroll would arrive in Spain without failure.
The business analyst. The convergence here is clear.
The ultimate lesson for any builder, founder, or investor looking at this history is not simply about engineering a faster logistics network or writing a faster algorithm than the competition. It is entirely about what you are actively constructing behind the scene while you happen to be in the lead.
The pattern recognizer. While everyone else is distracted.
The business analyst.
Exactly. The Rothschilds built a continent-spanning, impenetrable architecture of trust and capital dependency, while everyone else was distracted by the sheer speed of their pigeons.
The pattern recognizer. This history forces us to ask the definitive question for the modern era. Whether you are building a technology platform, a financial institution, or an industrial supply chain, when your current speed advantage inevitably disappears and the modern equivalent of the copper wire democratizes your core innovation overnight, what permanent, uncommoditizable asset will you be left holding? The business analyst, this is the research desk officially signing off.